Okay, let us begin tonight with our study. As with any guided discussion, those of us that's familiar with heaven, the first thing we must do is we must have ground rules for the guided discussion. Therefore, it can go smoothly. Tonight, I will be your guided discussion leader. And rules that set forth is I will ask that, first of all, that one person will speak at a time, and that way they can be clearly heard. And let's keep the guided discussion among us and not just toward the guided discussion leader. Most guided discussions are done in a circle type atmosphere, but due to the limited space here, we're going to have to sit like we could sit now. So just kind of be patient with us. And as we discuss, we ask that we respect each other's opinion. Okay, there's going to be some right comments and some wrong comments. However, if we disagree with something, let's do it respectfully and use the scriptures as much as we know how. Okay, there's going to be some contents that we're not going to be able to find due to the sake of time. But if there's a disagreement, let's use the scriptures as much as possible to just earn out our indifferences. And believe it or not, there will be some indifferences. And in this setting, we can learn how to meet those indifferences without being antagonistic against one another, not just in here, but out there. You'll find out the more you start growing in grace, the more you're going to meet people that you're going to disagree with when it comes to not only theological concepts, but doctrinal concepts as well. And in this setting, hopefully we can learn how to deal with those type of oppositions, okay? So let us get started. And in the book, we was going to start actually on page, and we want to take our time here. We're actually going to start on page, it'll actually be 13, where it says introduction to the lesson. This page there, with the books of the Bible. Well, it would actually be 13, I think, because you got 11, 12, and 13 is not.
6 and
Oh,
7
it
for that.
skips. Okay, yeah, it'd actually be 13, wouldn't it?
No, 7. In this book.
Is it 7? Is 7 in your book?
Yeah, 7 in this one.
Okay, it's 7 in y'all's book then. I had a cheat sheet. So yeah. So, and yeah. And we're going to start actually with the Old Testament. And what we want to do is just take a brief survey of ourselves of the books of the Bible. That's what it's going to start out with. This will not only help us to be able to know the books of the Bible, but know what's Old Testament and what's New Testament. In these Old Testament, we're going to see all sorts of stuff that's going to amaze us. That just didn't stop there. We're going to see symbolisms, types, shadows, history, things that'll make us aware that the same God in the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament. And so with this, the first number one question, I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to deal with the Pentateuch first. And did anybody get the answers to number one? Genesis. Okay, so Genesis, the first book of the Bible, if we can open there and just kind of go to it. And I hope that we are going to have some input here. Just want to say some things here about Genesis. Genesis begins with a rush and a roar. Countless stars and their satellite burst into beginning, headed for the vastness of space. Impressively great size and degrees, inconceivable velocities with such speed in the creation, mathematical precisions. The conditions of the creation was of great quality in its accuracy. I always told y'all that math was also in the Bible. Unimaginable no destination. There was no destinations for things to go when God created. So there's no way we can imagine where he would place the stars and the moon and the sun and the earth and all the galaxies in itself. Yet all the creation was encompassed in one single sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we see Genesis begin with the creation, but as we read through Genesis, we see something definitely went wrong. We know Genesis is a book of facts, a book of first, and I think we'll probably talk about the first things most of all, a book of faith, and a book of forecast, and also a book of funerals. Would anybody like to expound on anything that they discovered in Genesis, or just talk about amongst ourselves, or some enlightening things that we can talk about what really happened in Genesis? One thing I can tell you, in the beginning of Genesis, Genesis started in eternity past. When he started creating Genesis, there was no such thing as time. Our mind cannot conceive that. So Genesis exudes out of that. Anybody else like to comment?
In the first 4 letters of Genesis, we quickly find out a few of the attributes of God, like omnipotence. He doesn't answer to anybody. And the reason I'm saying that is, one of the things that jumps out of me about most books you read, the author takes the time to tell you who they are and what qualifies them, what school they. On most books we look at, brothers and sisters, you look on the back, it'll say about the author, and it'll tell you the schools and the degrees and what qualifies this person to be able to give you this information and you should pay attention to. But in this book, he opens it up and just says, in the beginning, God, and keeps going. So we see that whoever he is, he doesn't feel the need to explain himself as if he owes an explanation to anyone. Now, I'll just say that.
Amen. Right. And I like that concept. And we're going to get into the other books. I'm glad you mentioned that about the first 4 books. But as we get into the books, just a quick reminder for us, let's try to stay with the concept of that book, because I think with that, we'll hold to these teachers as we get even in the New Testament, because we'll find out that Peter and Paul mentions things about Genesis. If you notice, when Peter says it has escaped their notice in 2 Peter that the flood even happened.
Right.
You know, he reaches way back to Genesis and make that concept. Like today, we can say it has escaped our notice that the flood has happened. We just move through life as though that never happened, not looking to prophecy. When he says the second time, it'll be by far. But good concept there. You talked about something, Omari, about how the Bible doesn't basically try to prove that God exists. And if we notice in the book of Genesis, we have the beginning of everything but God. You know, talks about the beginning of God's creation. But in the book of beginnings, we have the beginning of everything but God. The Bible doesn't tell us where God's come from or his beginning nor his end. We have the beginning of creation, if someone want to note that and expound on that. We have the beginning of the fall, the beginning of the flood, the beginning of Babel, the beginning of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Would anybody like to expound on any of those? This is a guided discussion. I know we all did some reading. Like I said, we're all gonna bring some to the table.
Creation, even his plan, the love is there. You can see the love because he gives humanity everything they need to exist and grow. Even with the trees, the animals, the fruits, and everything, his grace was being shown in all that he gave before he even created man.
Would it be proper to say that if you're thinking that the things that we enjoy today had its beginning in Genesis and creation, you mentioned trees.
Right.
The very seeds that grow the trees today, was they originated in the garden?
Mhm. Let's see, when you talk about Genesis itself, and you brought it up on it yesterday, last night, whatever, it means the actual beginning.
That's
Okay?
what the word mean, origin.
The origin of. And when you made the statement that God is, when he says, the question is, you'll see it in here, when Moses asked, well, who should I say that who you are? And he says, I am who I am, because there is no beginning to him, but because he was there, and like I said, eternity past existed. Time didn't exist anywhere in here until you start looking at that in the third verse of chapter 1.
Okay.
That's when time began.
Okay. So talking about time, when he talked about creation, if we remember reading this, he said in the first night and the first day.
Mhm.
So with that, we can see that time didn't exist. There was no night and there was no day. It was just whatever it was. Good point. But I want to even go further in the things that I mentioned. We have the beginning, the origin of everything. Maybe that's why this book was named The Beginning, because we have other stuff besides what I've mentioned. How about the first murder?
Yes, I was going to bring that up, because
Yeah.
when you go ahead, I'm sorry, who did I cut off?
For me, what I got with the creation is like the circle of life. How everything has an order. It's organized. Like small animals feed off of insects, and the priority as you go through the food chain.
Mm,
And
yeah.
how it was all planned out for survival. And pretty much the way things got out of whack was sent into. How everything is like, oh, let's try this, let's do that. But when it originally started, there was an order. We didn't have to go hunt and say, oh, I want to try this kind of food. I want to go eat a lion. Or what? It's just, you knew that comfort of that place to be.
Mhm.
And then after, it just got so chaotic, so to speak, in the emotional, the understanding of your standing as a child of God.
Yeah. With that, life would have been a lot more simple, because I think there was only one dietary plan for all the
That's
creation,
it.
which was the plant life. Of course, when the
Vegetarian.
fall happens, we wasn't very vegetarians anymore. We begin to eat meat, and meat consists of things that lives and breathe. And in the fall, that's true. When the fall happened, not only man turned on man, but insects on insects, animals on animals, and everything just became chaotic with every living creature. Good point. Anyone else?
You see, with that, when you talk about the fall, when you talk about the murder, see, everything was perfect,
Harmonious.
harmonious or whatever was perfect as God had it. But you have to understand that also God had his plan was there.
Mhm.
Okay. And then you talk about the first of all, the first murder. Okay, but you have to go back to the first sacrifice that was made because of the fall.
Right.
That's all.
And in light of that understanding, put your thinking caps on. We can't teach that the things we're talking about happen in this perfect sense. We have to teach the scriptures.
Right.
But we have to teach them in light of what really happened, and ask the question, did God's plan fail?
No, God's
You
plan
know,
didn't fail.
Was he surprised when things happened? I mean, what happened in the garden led to everything that we're talking about now as far as the fall. But what happened in the garden gave consequences to every living creature. That's a message for us. What we do can give consequences to bad consequences to somebody else. And what was that? That happened in the garden that gave consequences to us all. Not only us, but even the animals, even the weather. Disobedience. Yeah, and that was the beginning. And today we still bear their consequences. When we talked about physical death, and that is the reason why we physically die today. We talk about birth pains for a woman. That is the reason why, because of what happened in the garden. You know. Any more comments on Genesis?
See, what you got? 52 chapters in Genesis? Is it 50?
And that's 50 something. Yeah, it's 50 something. I didn't know I was gonna be put on trial here, but I can
No,
find out
50,
for you right quick.
50 chapters in
50,
Genesis,
okay.
right? Because Genesis also leads to the next book anyway. But when you look at that 50 chapters, each story, each part of history, each part of what God's plan is played out in those chapters from the day one all the way to the end and everything of the 50 chapter, and including, like you said, introduction of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Joseph was what? A type of what?
Right.
Christ. Okay. But he'd also introduced Christ in chapter what? 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How does it introduce Christ in chapter 3?
Well, he introduced a redeemer. Go to chapter 3 there. Okay. Since I brought it, I'll go to chapter 3. Look at verse 15.
Watch this carefully, how he's going to introduce Jesus here in here. Great.
Okay. Verse 15. And I will put, this is after the fall. This is the curse that God put upon us, right? The guy, and I say upon us because if he put it upon Adam, he put it upon us. But listen what it said. He already he's dealing with this as it go forth here. He dealt with the serpent. Now he's dealing with this part, still dealing with the serpent. And I will put enmity between you and the woman. Okay. In other words, there's a void, and there's a fight going to be there. And then it said, and between your seed, Satan's seed, serpent's seed, and her seed, capital S. He's introduced there, her seed, and he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. That's for the introduction of what? The Redeemer. That was the introduction. That was in the plan set forth for it.
Okay.
That was the introduction to Christ. But even before that, we don't think of the first, second, and third person. We think of the first, second, and third person Trinity. We have to go back all the way back to Elohim.
So, and the rest of y'all can join as well now, but was this a, we would say arbitrary plan of God to do this? Is this something that God had to do because something happened that was a surprise to him?
So he said, accident, God had to pull an audible because he didn't like
Right,
the
because what happened? Omar, can you find in the scripture somewhere where it says for me that he was the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world? I think in Peter it talks about where he was the chosen before the foundation of the world. So you should about take and corner yourself. Eric?
Yeah.
Got anything to share with us?
I was thinking of some other things back to beginnings. What came to my mind reading on Melchizedek came to mind.
Okay.
And the Bible does that. It doesn't tell us where he come from.
No genealogy.
No genealogy. Whereas the genealogy all through the Old Testament, but none of New Testament. And I've always, in reading Genesis, I've always, that's always in the back of my mind. He was the type of Christ.
Right.
Um,
And Genesis is a book of genealogies. And you notice when we get to Matthew, it opens up with what? Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, and Genesis is the first book of the Old Testament. And then genealogies was important. Now, though Melchizedek, he was born after the order of Melchizedek, actually Jesus has no genealogy because he was not born. But in the human sense, for him being our Redeemer, genealogy is important in the Old Testament. Because in order to, I don't want to push to get to the New Testament, but we want to see this in Genesis. In order to know that Jesus is the one that sit on the throne of David, we have to show proof. and it talks about bloodline and royal line as we go through the Bible. So how can we prove that Jesus is the one and not Jesus's brothers? Because he had brothers and sisters, and not his brothers and sisters that sit on the royal throne, because they also was born down through Mary, but yet they was born down through Joseph as well. And so how is it that they both can have the same genealogies, you know, but not all of them can sit on the throne? And so this is where we get into things that may seem mediocre to us. Why is all these names here in the Bible? They are very important because they show a fulfillment of prophecy as time going. And we're not going to cover the whole book of Genesis, but I just, in this discussion, I want to give y'all food for thought. You know, when you're studying or you're listening to a preaching, a whole lot of concepts may not come from the pulpit for the sake of time that we know and you should know. Okay, so good point with the genealogists. Melchizedek had no genealogy. So with that said, we can't prove that Melchizedek is the one to sit on the throne, but we can prove that Jesus is. Anyone else?
God called Moses to lead his people, and he didn't want to. And he asked, "Who shall I say?" When he said, "I am." To me, we are aware of a little bit of time for mankind as a beginning and an end. But when you say "I am," you cannot put God in that same situation as you look at yourself or when you're a child or something like that.
Right.
Because it had always been.
Right. And a lot of theologians use the concept. Would anyone else like to come in on that?
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
It's outside of time. We are inside of time.
We got a limit. We got a, like I said, lifespan. What, centuries, decades, eons is what to God?
Okay. And all those are good points. You know, we exist. When you exist, you come
Time that-
out of something. So in this sense, a lot of theologians say God doesn't exist because he is. The word holy for God actually means other. As we are holy, we're not other, but he's other. We can't compare him to anything, any of his creation. He is other. And when he says, "I am that I am," they'll know me as I'm with them. And as he was with them, they gave him names. You know, Jehovah Jireh, because he was their provider. That's what Jireh means. You know, so they give God all these names according to his attributes and the things that God has did for them. Because if, like Lita said, if we ask the same question that Moses did, Abraham, who should I tell him who sent me? He never gave him his name. You know, because whoever names you owns you. And who gonna name God? Yeah.
See, when you said that whoever names you owns you, that's why when you say his name, when you look at all the history, when you look back in there, you see the many different names that he is called.
That he's called.
Okay, you know, provider, sustainer. He's called all his names because they could not put a definite hold on it. So that's where his attribute, as the Barry even brought it out at first, is the attribute itself comes out throughout the beginning of Genesis, throughout Genesis.
Right. And they knew him as he was with them according to the attributes that he dealt with them among him. And so they called him the provider and other names that they gave him. Good point, Lita. Anyone else?
I know in Genesis, the building of the ark, and I'm not sure if it's Genesis or Exodus, when they built the temple, when God gave the specific dimensions of the materials of what would be used and how wide and tall it would be. God is so precise in what is to happen and what is to be done and how big something needs to be to house all the animals for the ark, 2 by 2. That he knows what is needed. That if he knew what was needed for all the animals 2 by 2, and he knew exactly what materials,
Mhm.
how much materials was needed for his temple. He knows what each and every one of us needs in our lives. Rather we know it, believe it, he knows. We just need to believe it. If we can see it, it's right here, black and white.
It's the obedience again.
Yeah, now we can use that you just brought up and carried over to our lives. You know, the ark was a type of Christ.
Mhm.
It was safety found in the ark.
Yes.
Mhm.
And in the ark, he gave everything that was proficient for them to be sustained. In Christ, he gives everything that's proficient for us to be sustained. He knows exactly what we need. There was no way that Noah could have came up with the dimensions,
No.
because one, Noah didn't know how much water it was going to be.
No. Or
He didn't know how much
long.
wind it was going to be. So we can,
How much
He's-
weight?
how much weight, yeah. And so we can, like Noah, we don't know how much trouble we're going to run into, how much headwind. So he had to give us Christ to protect us. And though it's not dimensions as it was in the ark, he gives us the ultimate savior from our condemnation. And so he did with them. And he gave 2 by 2, in some cases more than 2 by 2, because God intended for procreation continue to go. You know, so and not only he did it with animals, he did it with the snakes, and he did it with mankind. He did it with the birds, because he intended for all those types of life to continue, even to this day. You know, he saw ahead. Not only he provided the ark, but he knew how much water he was going to let come up on the land. Because not only the water came down, but the water pushed up. Surprisingly, he gave Noah a prophecy that man had never experienced. He told him it was going to rain. In fact, we talked today, the Lord is coming back, and we have never experienced a rapture as such it is to be. So he gave him a prophecy. He said it was going to rain, and because God knew the devastation of rain, he told him how to pitch it in and out with tar, and how to build the ark for safety, that the devastation he was going to bring on everybody else. And so there was a devastation he's going to bring on everybody else, and the safety he had for us is Christ. You know, and he never promised Noah and his children that they weren't going to die. But from that hellish rage, he said, I'll protect you from. Yeah, that's a good point. You want to come up here and preach? That was a good one. That was a good one. Anybody notice anything else about Genesis?
Well,
We got the first marriage in Genesis.
First marriage. Between who?
Adam and Eve.
Between who?
Between whom?
Oh. Between whom?
Yeah, between who?
Man and woman.
The man and
Man and woman.
Okay, I named it.
the armies.
Don't argue. Thank you.
Well, we knew it had to be.
No,
man
no,
and
but you have to clarify it.
A
You have
good,
to make that point.
a good example, because we even talked about marriage in the New Testament. God has set the ultimate example how relations should be, you know, when it comes to intimacy. You know, make no mistake, you know, God starts in the beginning in his creation. The first marriage set the example how all marriages should be for all times, you know, in between a man and a woman. And if you notice, so when we marry as pastors, we even mention that, how God ordained marriage to be between a man and a woman. And again, that was for procreation. For we continue, as you had said here, Justice so eloquently, for the circle of life, for life to continue. Mhm. And so we see in Genesis just a lot of unique things that happens for the first time. And we see uniquely why they say this is the book of Genesis. The first domestic violence.
Mm.
And it didn't happen between two friends. It happened between two brothers. So even family feud happened in the Old Testament, so much so that where one brother takes another brother's life. But check this out, not because the other brother done something to him.
Mm-mm.
It's because of jealousy, because one brother's offering was favored more than the Lord. And to be sure, both brothers knew about God, because both brothers bought an offering. So it's not that Cain didn't know about God. Okay. He says sin is crouching at the door. If you just do what's right. Okay. And so sinners know God. The Bible says, even though they knew God, they what? They glorified him not.
That's the New Testament now.
Yeah.
You need to say that.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So even in the New Testament, that statement is made. In the Old Testament, it's showing that Cain brought an offering. And it wasn't just an offering that was made by his hands, because Abel took care of the animals. That was raised by his hand. As Hebrews said, that by faith, okay, Abel brought a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. So it was the way, it was his attitude why he brought the sacrifices, why he accepted him and why he didn't accept the other. Okay, it's like our worship. Okay, it's the attitude that we come together and worship with, more so than just what we say. God looks upon the heart. We all can sing, but what is the attitude that we're coming together with? So if anyone comes with the wrong attitude, it's not the first time it happened. It happens in Genesis. I think Ecclesiastes said there's nothing new under the sun.
None at all.
Because it all started in Genesis. Did you find that scripture for me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's the scripture concerning?
It's in Revelations
Mm-hmm.
13.
Let's go there. We're still in Genesis. Let's go to Revelation 13.
Where's Revelation?
You know, this is going to help us know which way to go when we get to the Bible. Because sometimes we get to, you know, they get up here and say, let's turn the passage so and so. And I'll be like, don't have me read it because I ain't got there yet. You know?
I'm already good for that.
Yeah. And I confess, sometimes I have to go to my contents and just kind of flip through the Bible.
Revelation 13:8, right?
Yeah. Now, we was talking about the ark, right? And we was talking about how Cherie said that God knew and he prepared for us, well, for Noah before the flood, the dimensions and everything, the exact measurement that he needed to keep that ark afloat, because all them animals he's gonna have on that. And God didn't have a scale to go weigh all the elephants, you know, all the lions. But when he built it to endure whatever weight would be in it and whatever wind would come.
And before we go into that, because Cherie said some powerful some
I'm thinking about it, putting on the road and getting up here.
and Justin said something right behind it that I think is important that people understand. So when we talk about God knew, people say that God knows and God knew. And a lot of times what we don't realize is, well, that word gnosko for us is talking about stuff that we come into the knowledge of,
Gotcha.
right?
Mhm.
Whereas God, it's not like he said, I need this particular amount, type of wood and this particular size to be able to keep the ark afloat.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is we're talking about a sovereign God.
Mhm.
So the dimensions and the wood and all of those things, it wasn't like if Noah would have cut off an inch here or decided to use gopher wood there, that the ark wouldn't stay afloat. Al, the issue is obedience. God put everything there for mankind and said, hey, I'm gonna provide this for you. When he says in the beginning, I was thinking about this when we talk about Genesis. In the beginning, God created. I hear in the beginning, God provided. And what I mean is he provided everything that was necessary for his creation to consummate back to his son,
Okay.
right? So I just want to make sure if nobody else don't understand, we as his children understand that God doesn't come into any knowledge. And when he says things to us, he's doing it because he don't want us, we second guess certain things. Are you sure? Are you sure with this? If when God says something specific, it's not that he couldn't do it any other way.
Right.
He wants to see if we're going to just submit because our flesh screams, I know a better way.
Right.
And I hear you saying it this way, but I'd rather do it that way. I don't want to take too much time out, but I just when we talk about God knowing it, there isn't anything knowable that he isn't already. When he says I am, everything is just everything. He's talking about everything past, present, and future, whatever you need. I already have it. I've already provided for it. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Good stuff.
You know, to know we come into knowledge and God already has all of it.
Good stuff. You know, and with that, I would say that God knows because it's his plan he's looking at. So he doesn't look down the eons of time and say there's going to be a flood, so I need to build an ark. Okay? He builds an ark because the flood is in his plan. So he can see the future because it's his future.
I decree it.
Right, he decreed
Of course I
it.
can
So,
see it.
in other words, if I'm gonna get some water, right, and I make this cup, I want to get so much water. I don't want to get the water to overflow. So he doesn't have so much water coming. He's playing that, okay? And so he had enough wood to provide for the water that he had coming. Right. Okay, I got you.
I just because we get so caught up in the specifics of things.
Right.
And God gives specifics because mankind needs specifics. And the reason why mankind needs specifics is because we always want to see if there's a different way. We always feel like we're missing out on something, right? So
if Noah would have shaved off an inch or two, it would have still stayed afloat.
I'm not saying it would stay afloat, but his plan wouldn't have failed. That was built in. If Moses would have shaved it off, God would have already had the knowledge of him shaving that off, and whatever he meant to come about of that would have came about.
But it's been a rougher ride.
I like to add to that.
Okay.
Because God is the ultimate creator, correct? So, and when we create as carpenters, we factor in that 10%. So, and we can make that minor mistake with that cut.
You got to measure
We
twice
cut
to
on the
cut
left
once.
side of the line when it's on the right side. So,
But like you said, you as a carpenter factor in 10%.
Come on, Eric.
Because of your experience, right?
Because you've seen that's
You've seen it
necessary for
It's nothing new under the
it's
sun.
a fail safe
Right?
for mankind.
Right.
But God don't have no fail safe.
Well, I think what happened though, when he gave this, correct me if I'm wrong, baby. If Noah is obedient, okay, and the ark stays afloat, it just builds Noah's faith. If you just do like the Lord tell you,
And now
you'll survive. You know what I'm saying?
Everybody else.
Yeah.
Everybody else too.
Everybody else sees it.
And I ain't talking about the ones on the outside of the ark,
Right.
they perish, but the ones on the inside of the ark,
They didn't, yeah.
when they get out, they learn, okay, this God is serious, and when he say, hey, do this, we gonna do that, do this.
Right.
Joke, I said, and you know what's crazy? I know it wasn't just the people who perished that was talking trash to Noah. I guarantee you, at some point, the sons, maybe even his wife, we're in Bible study, so we can talk about the human side of things.
Yeah.
I bet you his wife was like, man, I know you're looking at this out loud. What all the day? You spend all this time building? What? Come on, you sure? God said such and such, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're still preaching. It's never rained before. That was a strange thing. Think about it. Have we ever had a rapture of a church before? No. So the preaching back then, like the preacher now, was foolish to them.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
That had never happened. How did everything grow? The water came up from the earth, the mist, and it grew trees, and it fed the animals, and it fed the people. It had never rained before. That's why the preaching of Noah was foolish to the people. That's why our preaching is foolish to the world, because what we talk about that's coming has never happened before. And he says, just like in the days of Noah, even after all the preaching, people will be married, giving in marriage, building, going about their own business. I was talking about that with my wife the other day, was driving. Said, look at all this commerce going on. It's gonna be going on when the Lord come back, and people gonna be caught by surprise. The thing about it is, like Noah didn't know when until he got the first couple of drops.
Sky's falling.
It's gonna be different with the church, because it says it's gonna be a twinkling of an eye.
Ooh. That's
Yeah.
different now. That's different.
When they went knocking on the, you said you brought up a subject here tonight.
It's open
When
discussion.
they went knocking on the door was locked.
Mhm.
Oh, you talking about the ark?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was locked. It was locked from the outside.
Yeah.
They couldn't
Remember
get
we talked
out.
about out
Noah
there?
couldn't even open it for him.
Hey,
They
you
couldn't get
remember?
out or in.
You remember when
Yeah.
he talked about the ark? He said, come on in.
Yep.
And what he's saying is, I'm in here. He didn't say go in.
Right. Come in.
He
Gotcha.
said, he said come in.
Come in.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Al. Go ahead.
No, you
So-
just took it from me.
So, no, but I'm just saying, it's but the other thing you mentioned was when a drop comes, right, Al? I'm just talking about human nature.
You got time to run inside,
So
right?
when all that, if you thought it was never gonna rain, right? You've been talking trash all this time.
120
Noah.
years.
You done talked bad about his family and everything. As soon as you felt a drop, your whole mindset was like, wait, what is this? I'm not saying their mind went to Noah, but now you can see the ark because it's big.
Mhm.
You can see the ark. Can you imagine people rushing towards? It don't say that in the Bible, but I'm saying
Right.
in order for us to appreciate God's provision, we have to discuss the human side of it too, how we respond to
Yeah.
it too, Al.
Well, the unique thing about that is, you know, when the ark was lifted up, because the water from the bottom lifted it up. When the ark was lifted up, they was able to see, get in trees and try to do whatever they do.
Oh, yeah.
But when the ark left, there was nobody left outside of the ark.
Oh, yeah.
When the church is gone,
Ooh.
Mm.
there's gonna be people left.
But
Mm.
They're not gonna be
nobody
killed.
inside the ark, they gonna be left.
Yeah, but see, so different from the ark in a way where there's nobody to wonder what happened and try to make things better. There was no physical life or salvation for anyone further. Anybody who didn't get in the ark that wasn't saved, there was no salvation for. But when the church is gone, people are going to be left. They won't be killed off like an ark, and they're going to wander, you know, and they're going to seek salvation some other kind of way. And there will be salvation, but that's the vast difference. When the rapture happens, people still have an opportunity to get saved. They'll be called tribulation saints. But there's no pre-flood saints. The only people that came over is,
You mean post flood?
yeah, post-flood. Yeah.
We wanna read this out.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us what it's about first, though.
Revelation.
And we're gonna end on that thought. We can pick up
No,
Genesis
we're
next.
gonna pick it up next week.
We can pick up Genesis next week. Yeah,
One more point.
we can let you get it out to this. Go ahead and touch. Now, what is this revelation about now? God provided before need,
Mhm.
like you're talking about with the ark. He provided the ark before it rained. Right? Okay, go ahead.
In Genesis, right?
Mhm.
And Justin said, he was like, and we said it, even with smaller, people think it's just the spiritual side, but God set everything up physically to move towards his plan too,
Okay.
right? Okay, but, so nothing was left unprovided for
Okay.
in the earth. Physical, and this is gonna talk about the spiritual provision. All who dwell on the earth will worship him,
Mhm.
whose names have not been.
What verse you read?
13:8.
13:8.
Go ahead.
All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Got it? Before the foundation of the world, he had provided what we was going to need before Adam fell. The trees that the ark was built with was provided before Noah even started prophesying that it was going to rain. It was in the plan of God to have trees in the garden. You're talking about a provider. He provided a home for Adam and Eve before he even made them. Their home was the Garden of Eden. They had food, they had animals, they had God, they had need of nothing. And when we come into salvation, we have need of nothing. God provides it all for us in his word. All we have to do is go get it. Like I said Sunday, there's some things we would never know, except that we have the Spirit of God. There's some things we can be told if we don't have the Spirit of God. We will never know the deep meaning and truths of them, except we have the Spirit of God. You know, but we have to apply. You have one more point, BJ? We're gonna pick up Genesis next week.
Well, the last point is still dealing with Noah. Okay. If you look at chapter 8, you see verse 20, God makes a covenant with Noah saying he will never destroy this earth again as he done with the flood before. But he never said he's not going to destroy the earth again, because he also talked about the end of the earth, the beginning of the new earth, the new heavens, right there in that same verses when he's talking to Noah. He makes a covenant, a promise to Noah, said, and a promise to mankind, I'm not going to destroy this earth by flood no more, but I will replace this earth with a new heaven and new earth.
Right.
So
We'll be done. Good point. A lot to cover in Genesis. You know, we got Joseph, we got Potiphar, we got Potiphar's wife. We got to going into Egypt. We got the famine. There's a lot more to talk about in Genesis. And I think the more we're familiar with books like this, the more we'll be prepared to hear sermons from these Old Testament books, know when to apply Old Testament concepts to the life of the church. The Old Testament basically hones in on the sovereignty of God. I think somebody mentioned it earlier. You know, God does what he wants, how he wants, where he wants with his creation. And we are part of his creation. Anybody have any closing arguments on this before we get started? All right, very good, very good.
thanks, Sherry.
And those of us that didn't participate tonight, you know, hopefully next week you'll come with something and shed some light with us on this. This is how you do a guided discussion. Okay, so if anybody wants to do this, then just let us know what books you're familiar with. I'll be doing, again, like I say, these first two books, and then we'll move on. Okay.